Amara walked through the crowded streets of Lagos, her eyes cast downward, avoiding the gaze of passers-by. The city was alive with energy, hustlers calling out their wares, the scent of fried plantains wafting from street vendors, and the blaring horns of okadas weaving through traffic. But for Amara, it was all background noise, a cacophony that only served to amplify the anxiety bubbling inside her. She was heading to work, as she did every morning, her feet moving mechanically along the familiar path. The bustling city was a stark contrast to the quiet life she led. At 24, Amara was known for being the shy, reserved girl who always kept to herself. She worked as a secretary in a small office, and her life was a routine of early mornings, tedious paperwork, and lonely evenings spent in her small apartment. Yet there was something different about today, an unease that gnawed at the edges of her mind. She had woken up with a dull ache in her legs, as though she had run miles in her sleep. Her arms bore faint bruises, and there was a vague, unsettling sense that something was terribly wrong. Shaking off the feeling, Amara pushed open the glass door of the office building, greeting her coworkers with a small nod before slipping into her cubicle. She buried herself in her tasks, trying to ignore the lingering dread. But as the hours passed, her mind kept drifting back to the strange dreams she'd been having. Dreams of crowded clubs, pounding music, and a version of herself that felt alien. The day dragged on, the uneasy feeling refusing to leave her. It wasn't until her lunch break that the first real shock came. Amara was sitting alone in the break room, her phone in hand, when it buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen and froze. "Can't wait for tonight, Mira. Let's make it wild." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. Mira! Who was Mira? And why was someone messaging her as if they knew her? Panic set in as she opened her messaging app and scrolled through the contacts. There were dozens of numbers she didn't recognize, all saved under unfamiliar names. Messages poured in. Party invites, pictures of her in places she'd never been, with people she'd never met. And yet, there she was, smiling, laughing, dancing in a dimly lit club, dressed in clothes she didn't own. Her breath hitched as she opened a picture of herself. No, not herself, but the girl in the photo looked so much like her. The girl wore a short, shimmering dress, her makeup bold and flawless, her eyes gleaming with confidence, but Amara could barely recognize her own reflection. She dropped the phone, her hands trembling. What was happening to her? Who was this Mira? And how could she remember none of this? As she sat there, paralyzed by fear and confusion, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. For a moment, Amara hesitated. Then, with trembling hands, she pressed the answer button. "Hello?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "Hey, Mira, it's me, Ada. I just wanted to confirm our plans for tonight. You were amazing last time, by the way. Can't wait to see what you'll do next." Amara's blood ran cold. I'm not Mira," she stammered. There was a pause on the other end. "What do you mean? Is this some kind of joke? You're always up for a laugh, Mira. See you at the club." Before she could protest, the line went dead. Amara sat in stunned silence, the phone slipping from her grasp. Something was very, very wrong. And deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. Amara couldn't focus for the rest of the day. Her mind was fixated on the name Mira and the unsettling message from Ada. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the images of herself. No, of this other girl, this Mira, dancing with reckless abandon in places Amara had never been. The confusion was overwhelming, leaving her in a state of near panic. When her workday finally ended, she practically ran out of the office, not bothering to say goodbye to her coworkers. She needed answers, and she needed them now. But who could she turn to? How could she explain that she was being mistaken for someone else, someone who looked just like her? Amara's feet carried her instinctively to the small, cozy apartment she called home. The moment she stepped inside, she locked the door behind her and leaned against it, her chest heaving as she tried to calm herself. She had to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. Maybe this was all just some sort of elaborate prank, though she couldn't fathom who would go to such lengths to mess with her. Amara had never been the target of jokes or bullying. She was too quiet, too invisible. But the images in her phone were too real to be a prank. The messages, the calls, Everything pointed to something she couldn't ignore. Someone was living her life at night, doing things she would never dream of doing, and somehow, they had the same face. That night, sleep did not come easily. Amara tossed and turned, her thoughts racing as she tried to make sense of the impossible. When she finally did drift off, it was with the uneasy resolve to get to the bottom of this mystery, no matter what it took. The next morning, Amara woke up feeling even more exhausted than the day before. Dark circles had formed under her eyes, and her limbs felt heavy as she forced herself out of bed. As she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair, she noticed something strange. A faint smear of lipstick on her lips, bright red, a color she never wore. She stared at her reflection, her heart pounding. This wasn't right. This wasn't her. She wiped the lipstick away with trembling fingers, trying to convince herself that it was just a trick of the light, or maybe she had brushed against something without noticing, but the growing fear inside her told her otherwise. As she walked to work, her mind was elsewhere. She barely noticed the bustling streets around her, lost in thought, until she heard a voice call out, "Mira!" Amara's head snapped up, her heart skipping a beat. She turned toward the source of the voice and saw a young woman with wild curls and a vibrant smile approaching her. It was Ada, the girl from the phone call. "Hey, I thought that was you," Ada said, her tone friendly, but there was a glimmer of confusion in her eyes. "You look different during the day. I almost didn't recognize you." Amara's throat went dry. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. This girl knew her, knew Mira, knew her. But how? How could this be happening? "You okay?" Ada asked, her smile fading slightly as she noticed Amara's pale face. I think you've mistaken me for someone else," Amara managed to say, her voice trembling. Ada blinked, clearly taken aback. "What are you talking about? We were just at the club the other night. You said you were excited to meet up again." Amara shook her head, backing away slowly. "I'm not who you think I am. I don't know you. I've never been to a club." Ada frowned, confusion deepening in her expression. "But you're Mira. We've been hanging out for weeks. What's going on?" "I'm not Mira," Amara nearly shouted, the panic rising in her chest. "I'm Amara. I don't know what's happening, but I'm not the person you think I am." Ada took a step back, her eyes wide with shock. "Amara? But you look exactly like her." "I know," Amara whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't understand it either." Ada stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Okay, I believe you, but this is really weird. We need to figure out what's going on." Amara wiped her eyes and nodded, grateful for the girl's understanding. "Please, I just want this to stop." Ada hesitated, then reached out and gently squeezed Amara's arm. "Let's meet later today, after you're done with work. We'll talk about this. Maybe we can figure something out together." Amara agreed, too overwhelmed to think clearly. As she continued on to work, her mind was in a fog. Ada had recognized her as Mira, but had also believed her when she said she wasn't. It was the first glimmer of hope she'd had since this nightmare began. But as the day went on, that hope began to fade. More calls and messages came in, each one deepening her dread. Strangers calling her Mira, asking about plans she had no memory of making. Her phone was full of pictures of her, Mira, in places she didn't recognize, with people she didn't know. It was as if her life was slipping out of her hands, replaced by a version of herself she couldn't control. After work, Amara met up with Ada at a small cafe near her apartment. Ada had chosen a quiet corner table, and as soon as Amara sat down, she could see the concern in the other girl's eyes. "I did some thinking," Ada said, cutting straight to the point. "And I realized something. Every time we hung out at night, you were different. More outgoing, confident. It's like you were a completely different person." Amara nodded, feeling a sense of relief that she wasn't the only one noticing the difference. "I don't know what's happening to me," she admitted. "I'm scared, Ada. I don't even remember any of the things you're talking about." Ada leaned in closer, her voice low. "Do you think maybe you have some sort of split personality? I've heard of cases where people have different personas that take over without them realizing it." Amara's heart pounded at the suggestion. Could that be it? Could she really be living two lives without knowing it? I found pictures on my phone, Amara whispered. Of me, Myra, at clubs, wearing clothes I don't own, doing things I would never do, but I don't remember any of it. It's like someone else is living my life at night. Ada looked around to make sure no one was listening, then said, Maybe we can figure out a way to document it. Like, if you record yourself at night, we might be able to see what's happening. Amara hesitated. The idea of watching herself transform into someone else was terrifying, but she knew she had to find out the truth. Okay, she finally agreed. I'll do it. That night, Amara set up her phone to record while she slept. She didn't know what to expect, but her nerves were on edge as she lay down, trying to calm herself enough to fall asleep. Morning came, and Amara woke up feeling groggy and disoriented. The first thing she did was check her phone. Her heart pounded in her chest as she opened the video file. She watched as the footage showed her tossing and turning in bed. Then, at around midnight, something changed. She sat up, her movements slow and deliberate. Her eyes were open, but there was a strange look in them, distant, almost vacant. Amara's breath hitched as she watched herself stand up, walk to the mirror, and begin to apply makeup. It was a ritual she'd never performed before. Dark eyeliner, bold lipstick, a look that was completely out of character for her. As she continued to watch, she felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't her. This was someone else. This was Mira. By the time the video ended, Amira was shaking. She had no memory of doing any of those things, and yet there she was, staring back at herself with a confidence that wasn't her own. With the help of Ada, Amara began to dig deeper into her past, trying to understand when and how this split personality had emerged. The more they uncovered, the more disturbing the puzzle became. Amara's memories from the past few months were hazy, filled with gaps she couldn't explain. But there was one memory that stood out, a visit to a small market where she had purchased a wig, drawn to it by an inexplicable urge. It had been a moment of weakness, a fleeting desire to change her appearance, to feel different, even if just for a moment. The wig had seemed harmless enough at the time, but now it felt like the catalyst for everything that had gone wrong. It was as if the moment she put it on, something inside her had shifted, unlocking a part of herself that she had never known existed. Ada suggested they visit the market again to see if they could find the vendor who had sold her the wig. Amara agreed, though the thought of returning to that place filled her with dread. The market was just as she remembered it, crowded, noisy, filled with the smell of spices and the sound of haggling voices. As they made their way through the narrow alleys, Amara's heart raced, her eyes scanning the stalls for any sign of the vendor. Finally, they found him, a frail, elderly man with a long beard and piercing eyes. He recognized Amara immediately, his expression unreadable as he nodded in her direction. "You've come back," he said in a low, gravelly voice. Amara hesitated, then stepped forward. "I bought a wig from you a few months ago. Do you remember?" The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember. You were drawn to it, weren't you? As if it called to you." Amara felt a shiver run down her spine. "What's happening to me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old man's eyes darkened. "The wig you bought, it's not just a piece of fabric, it's cursed. It carries the spirit of its former owner, a woman who met a tragic end. Her spirit is strong, and it latches onto the wearer, taking over their life." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. "Is there a way to break the curse? To stop her from taking over?" The old man looked at her with pity in his eyes. "There is a way, but it will not be easy. You must confront her, face the spirit within the wig, and reclaim your life. But be warned, she will not go willingly."